Hello and welcome to the Gifted Ed podcast. We are your hosts,
Angel Van Howe, Gifted Coordinator and SEL Facilitator,
and Meghan McCarthy, Social Worker. We are grateful for the opportunity to share this space with you today as we talk about the complexities of giftedness. So let's get started.
Today we want to welcome Julie Skolnick. We're going to be discussing Julie's book titled Gifted and Distractible. Julie Skolnick is the founder of With Understanding Comes Calm, LLC.
That's really part of what I want people to understand is that gifted is not just smart. Gifted is a whole lot of things.
She passionately guides parents of gifted and distractible children, mentors 2E adults, trains educators, and advises professionals on how to bring out the best and raise self-confidence in their 2E students and clients.
Oftentimes, a 2E kid has a really hard time receiving positive feedback because they don't think it's genuine, because they receive so much negative feedback, because they don't believe somebody, because they don't know how to hear it or process it. You have an incredible opportunity and role to help parents feel good about their kid, which will in turn make their kid feel good about themselves.
Julie and her husband are parents of 3 twice exceptional children who keep them on their toes and uproariously laughing. Again, we want to welcome you, Julie.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here.
Angel and I both had the opportunity to read your book, which was just wonderful, Gifted and Distractible.
Thank you.
And as kind of going through chapter 1 and thinking about common questions that we're asked in our fields and thinking about how you approached answering them in the book and in the intro, some of those common questions were, how can I have a gifted child who also has learning challenges? Or how is being twice exceptional impact giftedness? And it seems like you kind of started walking us through how you elaborated that 2E kids' their neurological wiring is set up where it kind of impacts their ability to perform neurotypical, like to the neurotypical norms. It can poorly impact their self-concept and undermine kind of their strengths. How would you kind of share or elaborate maybe more on those questions in terms of how twice exceptionality impacts giftedness, or how those two can kind of live together?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. The whole idea of being twice exceptional, right, gifted with some sort of a learning difference, is such a weird concept for some people. Why? Because they completely misunderstand what gifted means.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
Typically I'll ask an audience, what's the Family Feud #1 answer for what gifted means? And everybody says the word
Smart.
Smart. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Smart. That's the audience #1 answer. So that's a piece of being gifted, but there's a very big difference between high achievers and gifted kids. So all of you teachers and parents out there listening, right? Raise your hand if your gifted kid is, has really strong executive functioning skills and is really organized and wants to listen and comply, and right, like that. Those are things that just don't really happen. Whereas a high achiever, those are the kids who sit face forward, turn in their homework, like to do the things for the sake of doing the things. Gifted kids, their job is to push back and to question and to critically think and to not just take something because somebody tells them that. So first of all, being gifted, if we think of the intelligence bell curve, if you think of a bell curve, right? The norm is in the middle of the bell curve. When you move standard deviations away on the left, when intellectual acumen diminishes, everybody agrees those folks need support. They're moving away from norm. They're having a lower academic intellectual proficiency. Well, when you move over on the right side, you're still moving that many standard deviations away from norm again. So what we call that is asynchronous development. This asynchrony of developing different parts of you, physical, social, emotional, intellectual, at different rates. Environment is very, very important to consider. And interest-based, passion-based learning is going to make a very big difference for gifted kids because they're interested in what they're interested in. We all know they hyper-focus on the things that they're totally interested in. When they're not interested in something, They need to know the why. Why is this something I need to be doing? And they need to be in an environment that addresses their learning modality. So hopefully that, I mean, I talk about this. I do talk about this all day, and I can talk about this all day, but I want to get you the answer that you want. But that's really part of what I want people to understand, is that gifted is not just smart. Gifted is a whole lot of things that I just mentioned.
And I think just the clear separation of high performance does not equate to gifted. It could, but just that difference is such a huge distinction between the two.
And that you can be gifted, remembering what that means, the existential considerations, the intensity, the perfectionism, the anxiety, and you can have what's called slow processing speed, which I actually prefer to call deep processing speed. You can have working memory issues. You can have a learning difference, which makes you 2E or twice exceptional.
Mm-hmm. So in relation to your definition of giftedness, we were hoping that you could describe or walk us through your 3-layer cake that you introduced in chapter 3.
Absolutely. So whenever I teach or I lecture or present, I really am always trying to role model. I really believe there are ways to address gifted and 2E children and adults in a way that is more relatable and is more digestible. Notice the pun there with the 3-layer cake.
I did, actually.
Yeah.
So my 3-layer, whenever I teach, I'm always using different mnemonics, imagery. Okay, so the 3-layer cake of giftedness is one of those images. So everybody out there, think about a 3-layer cake, choose your flavor, doesn't matter. Got to have frosting though. It's got to, the frosting or the icing, as my friends in Europe call it, has to be above, around, and between all the layers. Now, for those of you in the crowd who are 2E, and this has happened to me before, somebody raised their hand and said, could I have a different flavor for each layer? Yes, you can. It doesn't
That's
matter.
such a good question.
Any layer you want, any flavor you want. Mine's chocolate with chocolate. I'm boring, but that's what I am. So, okay. So the frosting or the icing piece that's above, around, and between all the layers, that's the assumption of gifted. That's the Family Feud answer of smart, bright, potential, intellectual, whatever word you want to use. That's the frosting piece. It's a thin layer above, around, and between all the layers. Then we have these 3 characteristics, or these 3 layers, which are asynchronous development, perfectionism, the other side of which can be anxiety, and then what's known in the field as overexcitabilities, sometimes shortcut as the letter O, the letter E, OEs. Some people call them superstimulant abilities, because in gifted land, we like to have a lot of different words to mean a lot of different things. But you can think of it as intensities. And those overexcitabilities come in 5 areas: intellectual overexcitability, emotional, imaginational, sensual or sensory, and psychomotor overexcitability. That's the 3-layer cake. And obviously there's more to say about all of those layers.
I think that really was a nice visual for me specifically, just to see how the different parts work together.
So, Julie, we've heard the question numerous times from parents and teachers, why doesn't the student notice the effect of their behavior on others? I wanted to connect that question to an excerpt from your book when you described how 2E students are trying to quiet the perfectionism monster in their heads, control their overexcitabilities, and deal with frustration over their asynchrony in the midst of being misunderstood by others. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I'm here to tell you guys, I'm going to be like a myth buster, or I'm going to debunk something. They totally notice. They totally get it. They know. They see the eye roll. They know they're, quote, annoying. They know they have the greatest antenna ever. They know when, especially an adult, gets them or doesn't get them. I've had parents and teachers share with me when 2E learners say something like, I only have 2 modes. I either attract or repel people. I'm really annoying.
Mm.
I know I'm annoying for people. You know, people either love me or hate me. You know, those types of, they get it. And the issue is the better question, I think, guys, is really, how can I help this 2E learner gain self-awareness and perspective? That's
Absolutely.
really the question. Now, I just finished saying that they're totally self-aware. So, they are self-aware, but maybe the initial question that you were saying when somebody says, why doesn't a 2E student notice the effect they have on others? They're self-aware, but there may be impulsivity. There may be this rage. We say there's a rage to learn for gifted kids and 2E kids. There's a lot of rage to communicate. There's so many words in my head. I just want everybody to hear them too.
It's true. Yeah.
And so how do I change up my messaging? How do I get better marketing for myself as a 2E human, as a child, to say something in a way that people can listen? So the question of why, I think I'm not actually going to answer. I'm going to answer the how. I'm so about the now what, if that's okay. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's really about having a gentle conversation with and I do this all the time with parents and teachers on how to talk to 2E kids. We have to depersonalize. You may nod your head at what I'm about to say, which is oftentimes a 2E kid has a really hard time receiving positive feedback because they don't think it's genuine, because they receive so much negative feedback, because they don't believe somebody, because they don't know how to hear it or process it. So
makes sense.
Depersonalizing is a great strategy where you talk about something you observe, or bibliotherapy is great, using books. Bibliotherapy is using books to learn through characters, or even media and a TV program or a movie or characters, whoever they relate to, like, talk to me about that. And then when you can sort of connect it, wow, that character really does have a lot of words that come out of his mouth. Notice I didn't say talks incessantly or too much, right? Trying to avoid the shamey, blamey, judgy words. So that's one way to help. The other thing is, when you notice a 2E child, crashing and burning, failing in some way, maybe socially, if you have a really good personal connection with that child, which is where everything should start from, a strong personal connection, then you can gently notice and say, hey, that doesn't seem like that interaction went so well. What do you think happened? Like, open up that door and then help them do a cost-benefit analysis. That kid might be like, yeah, I know they're kind of sick of hearing me talk about sharks all the time, but you know what? I don't care because I really need to say these words. Okay, well, then they made a choice. That's their choice. But we have to help them understand in a way that's helpful, not blamey, judgy. You know what? If I tell you how poorly you're doing, that's going to incentivize you to change. That doesn't work. It's kind of like the same reason why consequences don't necessarily work, because I'm not sure that that's the bigger priority for them. So we have to understand why, and we have to help them understand why. Does that make sense?
It does. And I really appreciate that you mentioned the connection piece, because as with all relationships, if we don't have the establishment of trust or understanding, it's just difficult to hear what that other person is saying anyway, no matter what intentional language that you're using. So I really do feel like that's important. And I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
The flip side is also right. If you have a deep personal connection, hard stuff is easier to process through. 100%.
Yeah. Right. Well, that makes sense. How can teachers understand the students' strengths and support in terms of their giftedness?
Yeah. So this is a great question on the heels of what we just talked about personal connection. So it's really important to sit down with that gifted and 2E learner and find out what makes them tick and what ticks them off. So here's what I'm going to tell you. I love to say, find the hardest kid to love and love them the hardest. You're trying to be objective every year. You're coming. I know you are. I know you have the best intentions in mind, teachers out there and parents and everybody. But we come with some preconceived information, a little recon that we got from our colleagues, and we know what Joey did in line, on the playground, in the lab, in the cafeteria, on the bus, whatever. We know. And we're just hoping against hope that that's not going to happen in our classroom or when we're in charge, right?
Right.
So I'm going to say do the opposite. Go head on, find that kid, spend, 5 minutes, and he or she or they may actually not believe that you actually really care. You may have to do this a couple times. You may have to try to ask questions about them. What do they love doing? What are they interested in? What's their favorite book? Now, one of the things I recommend when I'm training teachers is to actually have a survey to give it to parents on back to school night and to give it to the kids. And you know why this is so beautiful? Because one, it's going to, and the survey is sort of like asking these questions. What's your favorite book? What's your favorite movie? What would you do if you had a free 3 hours? What would you do if it wasn't screens? So we let them tell us all about what they want to do on screens. And then we ask them the other things. What's your favorite food? What do you who do you admire? All these questions. Okay. This is great for many reasons. One, it's fun for them to do. Two, it gives you stuff that you can ask about and say, oh my gosh, he plays trumpet. I play trumpet. So cool. He loves that movie. I love that movie, whatever it is. And then, and this is the part that most people don't think of, you have now so much information about your class. So when you make groupings, which are very hard for gifted and 2E kids to succeed in, you actually have a way of grouping like-minded, like-experienced kids together. And so it's probably going to be a better grouping for them, right? So I really love that as a strategy. One, the survey. Two, spending the 5-10 minutes, literally intentionally sitting down and just shooting the stuff. So yeah, these are intentional ways of spending time. You may be thinking, oh my God, I have 35 students. How could I possibly do that? But I'm here to tell you, pick and choose who you think is the most complex, difficult, least integrated, socially most awkward students, and sit down and learn something about them. It will breed loyalty to you. It will help them feel seen, understood, and valued. It goes a very long way.
And I really like the idea of the survey because you can reference it at different points of the year regarding different topics you're teaching.
For sure.
It's a good way to I guess just catalog it and have it.
Yeah. And if you have a kid who tells you, I love doing Taekwondo, well, maybe in your math class, you're going to, make the word problems about Taekwondo. Yeah. This many kicks divided by that many kicks, whatever.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like any time that you think it might take up in the beginning is only going to save you down the road.
Okay, so that sentence is probably the most important sentence that will be said in this entire podcast because that is true for so many things.
Right.
You got to get the buy-in on the front end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like when in doubt, just connect.
Totally.
That kind of seems to be what it comes down to, too.
Totally, Meghan. You can never go wrong.
Well, before we end today, we each wanted to take, or Angel and I wanted to take one takeaway that really left an impression on us when we were going through the book. So, Angel, do you want to go first?
Sure.
That's so nice.
Sure.
There were so many to pick from.
There were. It was difficult. But something that really struck me was the concept of the differences between responsibilities and expectations. The responsibility is the end result. The expectation is how the job gets done and should define exactly what the 2E child needs to do to complete the responsibility. So often we can skip the expectation part and just communicate the end results. And I just found the phrasing, to be so much more clarifying for me. And I really appreciated that.
I am so glad.
I know we both had to read that a few times to it was one of those whoa, wait a minute, let's get back to it.
And you can apply it to so many different people in your life.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I just really appreciate it on many levels.
Well, thank you. Can I jump in and just give a little example so our listeners can really understand?
Please. Absolutely.
So in the home context, usually I use the example of clean your room, right? We have this idea in our head of how to clean your room. Could be writing a paragraph. We could think about it as we know exactly what that means. But we have to unpack it. That's the responsibility that Angel's talking about. And the expectations are how to do that thing. So if we're talking about clean your room and the kiddo is in the middle of a huge Lego build and has 450 Legos strewn all over the floors, he's going to think to himself, or she or they are going to think to themselves, well, my parents must not mean to pick up those Legos because obviously I'm in the middle of a Lego build. Whereas the parents I'm totally talking about those Legos, right? So how do we
Right.
make the expectations clear, concise, consistent, and appropriate for the child? So that might involve chunking, which is each step. Look at your floor, look at the surfaces, look at your bed, whatever it is that your expectations are. So that begs the question, do you have those expectations very clear in your
Mhm.
mind? And if there's another parent, are you on the same page? That's really important. For teachers, let's say you're talking about writing a paragraph. Have you really chunked it out? Do they understand what that actually means to write a thesis sentence or to set up those 3 descriptor sentences with the examples that you're going to flesh out in the next paragraphs? Like, do they understand what that means? And I know we think we have sort of these visual webs that we give, and doesn't that do it for us? Different learners, man, they might need that verbal cue. They may need that visual cue. They may need even a kinesthetic way of relating to what your expectations are. And by the way, the best way to do expectations is to actually ask the child what they think
Mhm.
the expectations are.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that.
The kind of takeaway that I had was your what if, what else, which just that double reframe. The two phrases are kind of prompts to remind the person to challenge their original negative thought. And I think that prompting also or encouraging of perspective taking was also something that really I liked that part of it.
Yeah, that's a really important concept. This is so fun, you guys, to hear what was like so meaningful to you. Thank you for this. So yeah, that what if, what else is a beautiful reframe. I'm making this negative assumption. How can I start to think through with a positive reframe or a potential other conclusion? So, I'm feeling like, oh, that kid looked at me funny. Well, what if they just had a really bad morning with their parent? Or what else could be going on for them? Are they worried about a test they have later? So teachers, you can talk about this idea of what if, what else with your students. Parents, you can do the same thing, and we can all do it for ourselves, right?
Mhm.
You're walking down the street and somebody walks by, you wave, they don't wave back. You're like, oh my God, they hate me. What's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? What? And it's, well, gee, what else could be going on? Or what if something else is happening that doesn't have
Yeah.
to do with a negative piece about you? Yeah.
Or even just discussions, right, of books too. It doesn't have to be. I think that could be a cool way to incorporate that into
I love
book
that idea.
discussions.
That's beautiful. I love that idea.
So we wanted to kind of wrap up with our reflection questions that we posed. So the first being, how has today's conversation broadened your understanding of the relationship between giftedness and other exceptionalities? And that second question is, which student comes to mind as you reflect on our conversation? And how will you approach the student's needs?
So this next question is for you, Julie. This is our call to action portion of our podcast. Given our conversation today, what is one thing that you would invite our listeners to try?
Everybody listening, I work with parents, I work with teachers, I work with 2E adults, I work with clinicians and professionals. So I have all 4 legs of the stool, I like to say. So I deeply understand the overwhelm, the lack of training, the lack of support. So what I'm going to tell you is this. You can be the 2E learner's best and most important advocate. You may have to advocate to the 2E learner's parents who don't understand the profile or are having a hard time understanding their child's strengths because they're getting all the negative feedback also, which means you have an incredible opportunity and role to help parents feel good about their kid, which will in turn make their kid feel good about themselves. And I truly think you are exactly the person to do that.
Well, we've had so much fun having you on today. I don't want to say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We want to thank you for joining us today in this space. Please subscribe to the Gifted Ed podcast to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Stay tuned for our next episode that continues to unpack the complexities of giftedness.